Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive with us.
Yeah, glad to be back.
Today we're going to be looking at how children learning English as a second language,
Right.
how they actually build their vocabulary.
Okay.
So, I think a lot of people are probably curious about, like
Yeah.
how long it takes these kids to kind of catch up to native speakers.
Yeah.
What challenges do they face along the way?
Mm,
What factors might, help or hinder them?
for sure. Yeah.
And so that's what we're going to be looking at today. And we
Interesting.
got some really fascinating research to dive into straight from the University of Alberta
Okay.
that reveals that this process is a lot more dynamic than you might think.
It really is. Yeah. I think a lot of people kind of assume that vocabulary acquisition is just kind of straightforward,
hmm
but this research really highlights just how complex it can be.
Absolutely, yeah. So this study that we're looking at focused on 19 children
Okay.
from diverse language backgrounds,
hmm
all learning English in Edmonton, Canada.
Okay.
And Edmonton's a city where English is pretty dominant.
hmm
So why is that setting so important for this particular research?
Well, it means that these kids are primarily hearing English at school,
Right.
unlike, ESL learners in communities where there's larger non-English speaking populations.
Yeah.
So this is creating much more of an immersive environment for them, almost like they're having this constant English immersion experience outside of just the classroom.
I see. Yeah. So they're just surrounded by English almost all the time.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, the study uses this really interesting phrase,
Okay.
moving target,
Uh-huh.
to describe vocabulary acquisition.
Yeah.
What does that mean?
So think of it this way. With grammar, you can master a rule
Right.
and you can apply it consistently, right?
Mm.
But vocabulary is constantly growing, especially for native speakers.
Yeah.
So these kids are trying to hit a target that just keeps moving further and further away.
That's such a good analogy. So knowing that this target is always shifting, how long does it actually take for
Okay.
these children to kind of reach,
hmm
a similar level as native speakers?
Well, the study found that after about 3 years,
Okay.
the children's average receptive vocabulary, so that's the words that they understand,
Got it.
that was nearly on par with native English speakers,
Wow.
which is actually faster than some earlier research had suggested.
That's incredible. Only 3 years.
Yeah.
Now, wait, though,
Got
because
it.
the study also mentioned some kids actually surpassed
Yes.
native speaker scores after just those 3 years.
It is. It is. It's incredible. But it's important to remember that language learning isn't a uniform race, right?
Right.
So while some of those children excelled, others actually lagged behind, even with similar exposure to English.
Mm.
So it really highlights, the impact of individual differences.
Yeah, so each child kind of has their own journey,
Exactly.
even within the same environment. Now, something else that I found really interesting was the study's mention of general all-purpose verbs, or GAP verbs.
Yeah.
What are those exactly?
So think of them as like the Swiss Army knives of verbs, right?
Okay.
So instead of using specific verbs like build or make,
Mm-hmm.
these learners often relied on common vague verbs like do.
Okay.
For example, the study describes a child saying, he do ribbit, ribbit. Instead of, he says ribbit, ribbit.
Huh. Interesting.
Right.
So they're using do kind of as a stand-in for a whole range of more specific verbs.
Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating.
And the study suggests this isn't necessarily a bad thing.
No, not at all.
Okay.
It appears to be like a normal stage of ESL development. It's
Yeah.
a clever way for these kids to communicate,
Mhm.
even with a limited vocabulary. So
They're being resourceful.
exactly, exactly.
I'm curious about, what factors actually influence
Yeah.
how quickly these kids pick up English vocabulary.
hmm
Like, does speaking more English at home equal faster learning?
Well, that's where it gets even more interesting.
Okay.
So the researchers analyzed various factors,
Yeah.
and surprisingly, mom's education level
What?
turned out to be a stronger predictor
Really?
of vocabulary growth
Interesting.
than how much English was spoken at home.
Wow, I would have thought speaking more English at home would be like the key factor.
It's understandable, right?
Yeah.
But it's important to remember the context of this study.
Okay.
So most of these parents were new to English themselves.
Okay.
So this could mean that while English was spoken at home,
Mm-hmm.
the quality and complexity of those conversations might have been limited.
That makes sense. So it's not just about the quantity of English exposure,
Right.
but also like the quality of the language
For sure.
that's used in those interactions.
Absolutely.
Now, what about the child's age?
Yeah.
Did the study find any link between like when they started learning English
Yeah.
and their vocabulary development?
They did, actually. It seems that starting around age 5 might provide a slight advantage.
Okay.
And that could be due to just more developed cognitive skills at that point.
Right, right.
Like we discussed earlier, each child kind of learns at their own pace,
Yeah,
and their developmental stage likely plays a role.
makes sense.
Right.
So starting at the right time, developmentally,
Yeah.
could be just as important as early exposure.
Exactly.
What other factors did the research look at?
Well, they also looked at the role of nonverbal intelligence.
Okay.
So think problem solving and logic skills
Yeah.
as a potential indicator of language aptitude.
So are we talking about like the kids who just seem to kind of get things quickly?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And they wanted to see if that translated to them having a larger vocabulary.
Interesting. Did it?
Well, the results were a bit mixed, actually. While nonverbal intelligence did show a significant relationship with expressive vocabulary.
Okay.
So that's the words kids actively use.
Okay.
It didn't have the same connection with receptive vocabulary, the words they understand.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so even if a child is, great at puzzles and problem solving,
Right.
that doesn't automatically mean they'll have this bigger vocabulary to use in conversation.
Yeah, there's clearly more to it than just general intelligence.
Exactly. Exactly. It suggests that while nonverbal intelligence might be linked to language aptitude, it's not a perfect predictor of vocabulary acquisition.
Yeah.
There are likely other factors at play,
Right.
maybe specific language learning abilities that aren't captured by these standard intelligence tests.
Fascinating. This is all so fascinating.
Yeah.
It seems like we need to dig a bit deeper into this English at home piece.
Yeah.
It's clearly more complex than just assuming, more English equals faster learning.
For sure.
So after a quick break, we'll unpack this further
Okay.
and explore some practical takeaways from these findings. Stay tuned.
Really good.
So before the break, we were talking about how a mother's education level is a strong predictor of vocabulary growth in these ESL children.
Yeah.
But how does that actually play out in real life?
Well, it seems to be more about the way moms interact with their children overall.
Right.
A mother's education might correlate with a richer language environment, even if she isn't a native English speaker herself.
Right.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Asking thought-provoking questions, having real conversations, engaging in storytelling.
Yeah.
All of these contribute to a more stimulating language environment.
So it's about creating those opportunities for rich language use.
Yeah.
Regardless of whether the child's English is perfect or not.
Exactly.
I imagine this applies to teachers too.
Oh, absolutely. Educators can have a huge impact by using similar strategies.
Right.
Encouraging open-ended discussions, fostering storytelling, simply providing space for children to use language in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
These are all, evidence-based methods to support vocabulary development.
And don't forget about the power of reading.
Yes.
Even if a child isn't reading, independently in English yet. Being read to exposes them to a wider range of vocabulary.
For sure.
And complex sentence structures.
It's like a workout for their language brain.
I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're spot on.
Yeah.
Books just open up a world of language that kids might not encounter in everyday conversation.
Absolutely.
So we're talking about a multifaceted approach here.
Right.
Creating a supportive environment, engaging in meaningful conversations,
Yes.
immersing children in language through books. It's not about one magic trick, but rather a combination of strategies.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, let's circle back to that finding about nonverbal intelligence.
Okay.
I'm still pondering the fact that it was linked to expressive vocabulary, but not so much receptive vocabulary.
It is a curious finding, isn't it?
It is.
It really challenges that assumption that, a child who excels in problem solving will automatically have this larger vocabulary at their disposal.
So a child might understand a lot of words, but actually using them correctly in conversation might require a different set of skills.
That's right.
It's almost like having all the ingredients for a delicious meal, but not quite knowing how to put them all together yet.
That's a fantastic way to put it. And it raises some important questions
Yeah.
about what those missing skills might be.
Right.
Perhaps there are specific language learning abilities, beyond general intelligence that contribute to a child's ability to access and use vocabulary effectively.
It definitely adds another layer to the complexity of language acquisition.
For sure.
And it seems like the study's findings about English used at home also challenge some common assumptions.
Right.
We often hear that speaking more English at home is crucial for ESL children.
Yeah.
But this research suggests it's not quite that simple.
You're right. It's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
Remember, many parents in this study were still learning English themselves.
Right.
So even if they were speaking English at home, the quality and complexity of those interactions might have been different.
Right.
Compared to interactions with fluent English speakers.
So simply hearing English words isn't enough.
Exactly.
It's about the depth of the conversation.
Right.
The grammar, the nuances, all those elements that contribute to that rich language environment.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's why the study found mom's education level to be such a strong predictor?
It's certainly a plausible explanation, A mother's education might be a proxy for the richness of the language used in the home, even if she isn't a native English speaker.
Right.
It highlights the importance of focusing on the quality of language interactions, not just the quantity of English spoken.
I'm starting to see a pattern here. It seems like creating a supportive and stimulating language environment is key.
Yeah.
Whether it's at home or in the classroom.
Yeah, exactly.
But the study only measured English spoken at home, right?
That's right.
What about all the other sources of English these kids are exposed to?
That's a great point. And it points to a limitation of the study.
Okay.
To truly understand the impact of exposure, we need to consider the entire linguistic ecosystem these children are navigating.
Yeah.
Think about the English they encounter at school, with friends, through media. It all plays a role.
And those environments can vary so much.
Absolutely.
Some ESL kids might have tons of English exposure outside of school, while others might primarily be hearing it in the classroom.
Exactly. And it makes me wonder about the types of English being used, in different contexts.
Yeah.
Is it academic language, conversational, playful?
Right.
Each type of exposure contributes to a child's overall language development.
So how can we use this information to, support ESL learners effectively? Is there, one right way to approach language development?
That's a great question.
Or is it more about, understanding each child's unique situation?
It's definitely more about the latter.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Right.
We need to look at each child's individual circumstances, their background, their learning style, their access to different types of English.
Yeah.
And tailor our support accordingly.
So we need to be detectives,
Yeah.
figuring out what each child needs to thrive.
Exactly.
Rather than just making assumptions about what should work.
Right.
This research is really challenging some of the common beliefs about ESL instruction.
It is. It really reminds us that language acquisition is a complex process influenced by a myriad of factors.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing vocabulary words.
Right.
It's about developing confidence, love of language, and the ability to communicate effectively in different situations.
That's a beautifully holistic way to think about it.
Yeah.
It's about fostering those communication skills that go beyond simply knowing a bunch of words.
I agree.
And this research suggests that we need to look beyond just the amount of English spoken and focus on the richness and quality of language interactions.
Precisely. It's about creating those positive and engaging experiences with language that help children develop a genuine love for communication.
We've covered so much ground in this deep dive.
We have.
And I'm sure there's still more to explore.
Oh, for sure.
What other, intriguing details stood out to you from this research?
Let me think. One thing that really stood out to me was that finding about English use at home, not being as straightforward as we might expect.
Right.
It really kind of underscores that we need to move beyond simple measures like, how much English a child speaks, and really focus on the quality of those interactions.
So even if a child is hearing English at home, if those conversations aren't very complex or engaging, it might not have the same impact on their vocabulary growth.
It's like the difference between just watching cooking shows and actually getting in the kitchen to experiment with ingredients.
I like that.
Right. To truly develop your culinary skills, you need to actively engage with the process, make mistakes, learn from those experiences.
And in the case of language learning, those richer ingredients might come from interactions outside the home.
Absolutely.
At school with friends, through media.
Precisely. Remember, this particular study focused only on English spoken at home.
Right.
To really understand the impact of a child's environment,
Mm-hmm.
we need to broaden our lens and look at their entire linguistic ecosystem.
That makes sense. And that ecosystem can vary so much from child to child.
Oh, absolutely.
Some might have, tons of English exposure outside of school.
Right.
While others might primarily be hearing it in the classroom.
Yeah. Exactly. And it makes me wonder about the types of English being used in different contexts.
Oh, interesting.
Right. Is it academic language?
Okay.
Conversational? The playful language used in, like, games and songs?
Right.
Each type of exposure contributes to a child's overall language development in different ways.
So how can we apply these insights to actually support ESL learners effectively? It seems like there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
This research reinforces that idea that we need to be attentive to each child's unique circumstances, their background, their learning style, and tailor our support accordingly.
So rather than assuming that, more English automatically equals better results,
right,
we need to be more like detectives.
Yes. I love that.
Figuring out what each child needs to thrive.
Exactly.
And I think this research also highlights the importance of moving beyond just vocabulary acquisition.
Absolutely.
Language development is about so much more than just knowing a lot of words.
Well, it's also about, developing confidence, fostering a love of language, and nurturing that ability to communicate effectively in a variety of situations.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
Yeah.
It's about empowering children to use language as a tool for connection, for expression, for exploration.
Exactly. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with one final thought.
Okay.
This research really focused on the what and the how of vocabulary acquisition.
Yeah.
But it's equally important to consider the why.
Interesting.
Why are these children learning English?
Right.
What are their goals, their dreams, their aspirations?
By understanding the reasons behind their language journey, we can create learning experiences that are not only effective, but also meaningful and motivating.
Precisely. Because ultimately, language is about connection, communication, and empowerment.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
And that's something worth celebrating and supporting in every way we can.
I agree.
This deep dive has been just packed with insights. Challenging our assumptions and shedding light on this complex and fascinating world of language acquisition. We've learned that it's not just about memorizing words.
Yeah.
It's about creating, a rich and supportive environment.
Right.
Where children can explore language, experiment, and discover the joy of communication.
It's been a pleasure diving into this research with you.
Likewise. And to our listeners, we encourage you to continue exploring these ideas.
Yeah.
Observe the language used around you. Consider the why behind language learning.
For sure.
And most importantly, keep those conversations flowing.
Absolutely.
We'll be back soon with another deep dive into the world of language and communication.
Sounds good.
Until then, stay curious.